everyone. Thank you for your patience. Very aptly named session, Practical Challenges. We're going to talk about data sharing, but we just had some practical challenges, as you probably saw. So thank you for bearing with us. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you're refreshed after a cup of coffee or tea. So this morning we're going to talk about research data. And we know that where researchers manage and share their data, their research is more effective, it's more productive. A study of 7,000 NSF and NIH-funded grants found that where researchers manage their data, those studies were twice as productive. There is a citation advantage to sharing data for researchers, and yet researchers are not actively and regularly sharing their data, and certainly not in ways that make it discoverable and usable by others. So we've brought together a panel to firstly look at a little bit of information about some of the things we've learned from researchers at Springer Nature over the past 12 months. And then as one of our key findings from the research we've been doing, or key recommendations, was the importance of all stakeholders working together to find collaborative solutions. I'm really delighted to have a panel of both experts in their field and in this area, but also representing the journal and the publisher perspective, a representative of the funder perspective, and the institution and library perspective. So I'm going to ask them now just to introduce themselves briefly, and then I will give you a little overview of some of the survey data that we're going to be talking through today.
Hi, my name is Dina Paltu. I'm the Director of the Division of Scientific Data Sharing Policy in the Office of the Director at the National Institutes of Health. I'm also serving as the Interim Assistant Director for Policy at the National Library of Medicine.
Hi, I'm Robert McDonald. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Technology Strategy at Indiana University with the libraries. And I'm also responsible for the Scholarly Communication Program for the Bloomington campus.
And I'm Jörg Keber. I'm Editor-in-Chief of PLOS ONE. I'm in publishing since 2005. I used to be an editor at one of the Nature journals before being Executive Editor of Nature Communications, and then for the last 1.5 years I'm at PLOS.
Thank you. So the way the session's going to run is that I'm just going to give you a quick overview of some of the market research that Springer Nature, the organization I work for, has done over the last 12 months, and then I'm going to invite each of our speakers to give their perspective on the challenges and opportunities and solutions to help researchers manage and share their data better. We're then going to open it up to a Q&A. I have lots of questions I'd like to ask our panelists. I hope that you do too. We will be taking questions from the floor. And I realized two things this morning. I realized that we're missing a very important stakeholder group here on the panel today, which is repositories. And so I'm sure we will be talking about how we're all working with repositories today, but just acknowledging that they should be here, and next time we'll make sure that they are. And then the second thing was, I think subconsciously I must have taken in the theme for this SSP meeting with the subheading, what's working, what's holding us back, and where do we go from here? And so that's very much how we're going to structure our discussion. But because I like delayed gratification, we're going to start with what's holding us back and move on to what's working and where we can go from here. So with that, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of some research that we've done to start framing some of this discussion. So the research I'm going to share with you, we've also published as a white paper. We published this back in March. The full text of the white paper and the underlying survey data are freely available on Figshare. I'm sorry about the broken URL on the screen, but I wanted it to be big enough that you could actually read it and go ahead and get the data if you would like to. So what we did is last year we asked researchers, actively working researchers who were also actively publishing, about their attitudes and experience of data sharing, specifically at the point when they're preparing an article for publication. So bear that in mind. These are people who are actively preparing a manuscript for publication, and they're thinking about data sharing at that point. We were really thrilled with the response that we had in many respects. We had over 7,000 respondents, which makes this one of the largest surveys of researchers about data sharing that's been done to date. And in particular, we had a very good response rate from North America and Western Europe. To note some caveats, some of which are already jumping out to you, and limitations on this slide, we had too small a sample size from Africa to be able to draw meaningful conclusions, and limited in South America as well. And then a very small response rate in China and Japan. So given the importance of research in those regions, we're actually in the process of repeating that research specifically in Japan. And those results will be available by the beginning of July, and then later this year we'll also do the same in China. The other limitation I would note is you'll see that when we break down the respondents by subject area, there is this enormous, unhelpfully named bucket called other sciences. So we have medical sciences, biological, physical, and earth. And then all of the other world's research is grouped into other sciences. And the way that we asked the question at the time, which is a real learning, we didn't ask detailed enough information that we could then split that out to look, for example, specifically at the humanities or some of the social sciences. And we know there are big differences between those subject areas, so we haven't attempted much analysis on that group, and that's something that I hope either others will complement the work that we've done or will look to remedy in future. So the good news, two bits of good news. Researchers, when we asked them, over 1 out of 10, overwhelmingly said that they value discoverability of their data, and they think it's important. So 76% of respondents rated that highly, and we gave them a 10-point scale. The most popular ranking was 10 out of 10 in terms of importance. There were some interesting variations by country, or by region, and also by subject area, with biological sciences, perhaps not surprisingly, ranking data discoverability as the most important. Of the 4 subject areas that we're going to look at in a bit more detail, physical sciences ranking data discoverability as least important. But I think there it's worth bearing in mind that we were asking about sharing data at the point of publication, and that may be that people are sharing data earlier in the process, and so therefore don't consider it important at that point. And looking, on the bright side, 63% of respondents, so the majority of researchers, are sharing their data in some way. So they either, at the point of publication, shared data files by depositing them into a repository, sharing them as supplementary information files, or both. Now, one of the things that at Springer Nature we think is that while supplementary information files are better than not sharing at all, they're far from optimal as a solution. They don't make data particularly discoverable or citable in its own right. Other interesting things we found: there were some subject differences between how people were choosing to share and the level of sharing. So the highest level of either using repositories or supplementary information and repositories was again in the biological sciences, followed by the earth sciences. One interesting, and this can be explained often by community norms and accepted standards. So in the biological sciences, for example, in many subject areas, there are accepted community norms and standards about using data repositories to share data, an expectation that you will make your data available. One of the things that surprised us was that of those respondents working in biological sciences where there are long-established community norms for sharing data, for example, RNA and DNA sequencing, only 54% of respondents in those subject areas stated that they were actually using discipline-specific repositories. So even in areas where sharing is widespread and it's the norm, people aren't necessarily aware of or using the most appropriate repositories for their data. Why? What problems do authors have? What's holding them back? So overwhelmingly, what they told us is that the number one reason is the most challenging reason for me what the barrier that I'm experiencing is organizing data in a presentable and useful way. Other popular answers were, and that was the most popular answer in every region and at every seniority. The only exception, subject area-wise, was in the medical sciences, where unsure about copyright and licensing, and as you dug into the free text comments, as you would expect, concerns about patient privacy, appropriate use of where to put their data became more important. Another interesting finding that surprised me is that small data sets were the least likely to be shared. And when we asked researchers why, they said, I didn't know what to do with it, or I didn't think anybody else would find it interesting. So that's an interesting challenge to think about. One of the other things we looked at was splitting out the respondents by seniority. And as I've said, across all levels of career stage, the number one challenge cited, apart from in medical sciences, was organizing and presenting their data in a usable way. We did see that over time, as researchers get more senior, they're slightly more likely to say that lack of time is an issue. And one of the things that we're going to pick up on in the panel is it worth my time, which we think may be even more of an issue. But lack of information was a much bigger issue for early career stage researchers. So not knowing which repository to use, not knowing what they could share and whether they were able to do so in terms of copyright and licensing. This is one other surprising finding to share with you. So I was thoroughly expecting that given the number of data policies encouraging or mandating data sharing in the UK and Western Europe and also in the US, that we would see much higher levels of reported sharing in those countries. Actually, if the global average is 63%, the highest levels of sharing reported were from Poland, Germany, and Switzerland, with the UK at 58%, the US at 55%, and Canada at 50%. And again, that may be because we were asking about sharing at a particular point, but it's an unexpected finding. So some quick thoughts about what we found and recommended that we could do to increase these levels of sharing. So one very important finding for us is that all of the people involved in the research ecosystem have a role to play. And actually, we probably need to work together as well as providing solutions ourselves. Given the lack of knowledge and information, education and support is clearly really important. Again, making it worth researchers' time in terms of incentives and credits, and removing those barriers, faster, easier routes to share data, making it easier to share than not to share. So before I invite Dina, our first speaker, to give her perspective, I just wanted to give a brief 2-minute overview of some of the things that Springer Nature is doing to address some of these things. So, standardized journal data policies, we introduced these back in 2016. This is to really address the fact that authors and researchers find it hard and confusing to know what a journal expects, and we wanted to provide really clear guidance about what was expected and also start to roll out more stringent data requirements across all 2,000 plus journals that we publish. The majority of our journals where they've adopted this are either adopting and encouraging data sharing, or type 3, which is encouraging data sharing but requiring data availability statements. And so, for example, Nature and all of the BMC journals, that's over 200 open access journals now, require that. To the most stringent types where data sharing is required and actually is required for your manuscript to be peer reviewed. And a number of journals do have those most stringent policies, including Scientific Data, which is our dedicated data journal. Some other things that we're doing, we're actively promoting the use of data availability statements. A data availability statement is basically a section in the article that says, here's where the data are, and ideally provides a link to where you can get the data, or otherwise tells you how you can access that data. We encourage the use of depositing in repositories, and we actually maintain a list of recommended repositories which we have assessed based on a set of publicly accessible criteria. That list is freely available on Figshare under a CC BY license, so if you're interested in recommending to your own authors which repositories they can use, then we very much encourage you to point them to that list or to use it yourself. One other thing that we're doing, and working with the community to do, the more we talk to other publishers about journal data policies, the more we realize that actually it's not enough for one publisher to introduce a set of standardized data policies, and lots of publishers have now done this, and that's great. But actually what researchers really want is they want to know where they are, whoever they're publishing with, and what they should be doing. So working under the auspices of the Research Data Alliance, we are co-chairing a working group which has been going for just over a year and is actually making really good progress to a standardized framework of policies that any publisher should be able to adopt. And that group's now been joined by a number of funders who are looking at how they can standardize their policies as well. We have a help desk for our authors and also for our editors, which includes help on which repository to use, how to comply with the journal data policy. That's completely free. And then most recently, we've actually, based very much on our learnings about the barriers for researchers in terms of managing and sharing data, we've introduced an optional service, and it is a paid-for service, for researchers or institutions or organizations who want practical help to deposit and curate metadata. So this is an example of an output of the Research Data Support Service. So there's a human-readable summary of data that has been organized and deposited into Figshare, so it has a DOI associated with it and is citable. It also has machine-readable information, which is curated in terms of categories, keywords, license information, etc. And to give you a very practical example, just to close off, here's what it looks like in a BMC ecology article. So you can see the article on the top left, or a little bit of it. The statement I mentioned is just below it. And then that links out to that Figshare record. And in this case, the links are bidirectional. So the Figshare record links to the article, and the article links to the Figshare record. And you can hear a little bit more about how we did that on that blog post link. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dina. And Dina, I will just get your presentation up.